Genocide is the eradication,
the ethnic cleansing,
the attempt to systematically root out an ethnicity
of a certain group of people,
beyond mass murder.
So any method of trying to erase a group of people.
Welcome to our first live stream. We are the Human Dialogue. We are excited to kick off our first topic, which is genocide. Heavy topic for most, but we're excited to kick it off with the first live stream. Today we have three wonderful guests with us. If the guests will please introduce their names, occupation, and age.
I'm Eddie, 35 years old, and occupation is an entrepreneur.
Nice.
Hey, I'm Emily. I'm 27, and I'm an account manager for a tech company.
Hello, my name's Kaya. I am 24, and I am a basketball coach.
Good to hear. First, I will be explaining the first half of our live stream, which is a debate slash Jubilee style. So how it's going to work is I'm going to have three wonderful guests line up on the neutral. I will ask them 10 to 11 questions on our topic, and based off of their responses, whether they agree or disagree, they would move to the side that they believe is right. So they're currently on neutral. To the left of them is somewhat disagree, and then keep going is completely disagree. To the right is somewhat agree and then completely agree. And based off of where they stand, we'll go from left to right. I'll ask each of them how they feel or ask them why they chose that side. And from there we can get into discussion. So yeah. So I'm gonna start with the first question. And before I even start that, I wanna ask each of you guys, how would you guys define genocide? We'll start with Emily.
First, okay. This would be discrimination and active harm against a certain group of people.
I would say the intentional and systematic decimation of a population, whether that be for an ethnic group or a religious group.
I would say similar, basically trying to eliminate a group based on ethnicity, religion, or some other label. And I also just think of killing a lot of people.
Thank you for your insight. I'll move on. I'll start the first question. First question is, genocide often occurs due to the dehumanization and demonization of certain groups within a society. I'll repeat the question one more time, just in case. Genocide often occurs due to the dehumanization and demonization of certain groups within a society. Start with Emily.
Historically, in different examples of genocide, we see dehumanization in many forms as a justification to destroy these people. And a lot of these statements are exceptionally unfounded or overdone, and again, a justification for killing. If it's someone that you relate to, someone who is very humanized, you're not going to sway a group of people to commit these massive acts of violence. So this dehumanization is key to the beginning stages of genocide.
Yeah. That was phenomenally said. I think that it's very difficult to be able to hurt somebody who you can identify as being a person. I think the more that you can dehumanize them and separate themselves from you, the easier it is to be able to do horrific things, especially when people are in large numbers. If you just are looking at a statistic rather than as an individual, then it makes it a lot easier to be able to make a decision rather than actually looking at somebody's face and being able to tell them this is what's going to happen. So levels of separation, as well as the capacity to be able to, dehumanize and desensitize people to what the violence actually is, makes it capable for people to take life en masse.
Yeah, I think you have to demonize them to basically say you can't relate to them. They're a threat to you, or some other rationalization that makes it okay to kill them.
Do you think you can add on to that? You should add on to that point of like, and this can go on for all of you, but I think most people in the Bay Area would agree. I think based off of bias that genocide is completely bad. I think based off of research, it'd be really hard to find someone who would pro-genocide because that's rest of that. I want to kind of ask you guys, if you guys met anyone or know anyone that's more leans to that side or gives off that vibe, specifically in the Bay Area.
I don't know anyone specifically, but I think one of the bigger questions we have to address is, I think we often see it as two-sided. And so as somebody approaches genocide, they're going to see it as one point of view, as violence is being committed against this person, when we have to look at it as a whole, situation as a whole. So I don't know anybody personally, but I can see how some views may be shifted and very one-sided when it comes to forming those opinions.
Not in the Bay Area directly, but I worked with somebody who is Zionist, and I don't speak with them on a consistent basis, but I have maintained my following through social media because I think it's interesting and pertinent to be able to see both sides of the conversation, even if it's not necessarily something I agree with. So genocide as a whole, I don't think it has been normalized or deemed okay, specifically because there's lots of conversations about her heritage and what that has meant for her people as an experience. But at least a lot of what the rhetoric that I've seen her take up on is essentially the othering and dehumanization. So rather than taking a look at the individuals who are innocent in the circumstance, which happens to be the majority of the people in Gaza and Palestine right now, they're looking at the small group of individuals who is inciting violence, and they're focusing in on that. So rather than looking at it as broad strokes or as the whole picture like we were talking about on this end, being able to understand all sides of it, it's been very mono-focused on a very small niche group of people. So again, outside the Bay Area, and only one person that I've had interaction with like that, but they're pretty stuck on that.
Yeah, I think early on in the conflict, I think I know some people who would have said it's not genocide, but it's defending oneself early on in the conflict. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your insight on that first question. If everyone please go back to the neutral, I will ask the second question. Education and awareness campaigns about genocide are not effective in preventing future atrocities.
They're not effective?
Yes. Education and awareness campaigns about genocide are not effective in preventing future atrocities. Again, start with Emily.
Yeah, so this is definitely a challenging one, and we know that learning history helps us have better insight into current situations, but we also understand that when it comes to something like genocide, it's a bigger social issue. So having that education and understanding the history is key to moving forward, but with it being a social issue, whoever you learn this idea from or whoever the leadership is that's promoting this idea is going to promote it, is going to use every power they can to sway the people near them. And even if someone is very highly educated, if you have somebody who is eloquent, who is very persuasive, there's still going to be a way in.
Thank you.
I took this as more of like a historical kind of question. We've seen genocide time and time again as a race, whether it be through King Leopold and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which largely gets swept under the table, being the largest single killing and culling of a people on the planet, and then following up with the Jewish people during World War II. And if you look at the history, it seems to repeat itself. I would love to say that we're not going to run into these same issues over and over again, but when you put people in a position where they have the capacity to do such things, it seems as if they take the opportunity. So I would really hope that learning history and things like that can dissuade us from making terrible decisions and doing horrific things. But if history is anything to base it off of, I think it's pretty unlikely.
Yeah, so I slightly disagreed because I think education for certain groups of people can be effective in helping them think. If you really study a genocide, you can actually see what led to the events, from the political part to the economic part to the actual justification of trying to eliminate a people. And I think when you actually study it, you start to learn about human nature, and you start to learn about, hey, like if you're coming from a place where you're not tied to a trauma in your background or your history, you kind of have a chance to start afresh in a sense to say, look, this is kind of part of the way human beings act, and I should watch out for this, right? At some point, political conflict or conflict in economics turns to, you might be tempted to demonize a whole group of people. But if you've studied up, you might say, we draw the line at kind of just generalizing a whole group of people, right? So I think it's possible for education to be effective.
Based off of Eddie's response, do you have anything to challenge up on his response? Anything?
I think we're saying very similar things, just two different perspectives on it. I'm a little bit more pessimistic, he's a little more optimistic. I mean, the education piece can definitely be helpful with being able to get people to understand why things take place, being able to see the patterns in human recognition and things like that. But I don't know, maybe I'm just a little bit jaded in that regard.
I think coming from an education approach, I like what you said about learning all aspects of what happened, and I didn't think about pinpointing, but we also have to take into consideration the inequality of education as a whole. Of each person is going to get a different perspective from whatever teacher they have or wherever state they're from, and even country as well. Thank you. And that can kind of change views as well. And I think that's been particularly challenging in the U.S. the past few years as we talk about where our history comes from and who the main players are in history. And so purely from that education perspective, it's got to be education and the follow-up within an individual's life, and better understanding how the human race processes those items. That's mostly from the education perspective.
I feel like to follow up with the education side, you have to do a little bit of the research yourself. Because back to what you're talking about, it depends on the teachers and everything. You're going to get the winner's narrative regardless of where you are. And even state to state within the United States, where there should be homogenous learning from everybody and everywhere, that's not the way it works. So unless you're willing to take some time to be able to actively inform yourself on topics, it's difficult to have a fully fleshed opinion. Because regardless of where you're getting your information from, there's going to be implicit bias. But just because there's implicit bias doesn't mean that it's truthful. Even if it's something that sounds good to you, you got to be able to know both sides, and that's going to take a little bit extra effort.
For sure.
I thought of one example, if I could add to what I'm saying, is I think of Rwanda, right? Rwanda had a genocide, and right now, I don't think for a while you're going to see them ever being open. They're so sensitive to demonizing a certain tribe. Like, we're all Rwandan is kind of the call right now. So I think they educated what happened in the past, and they said, all right, they're going to be super sensitive to that going forward. And the country's starting to thrive off of that economically in a lot of ways. And so I think the education piece is important, even, I don't know for how long you prevent it, right? But I do think it plays a role in preventing.
Yeah. Active engagement with the information.
There will be some later follow questions that will add on to like whether it's like questions that are about like whether the U.S. hides other genocides or we only focus on one, or but if everyone will go back in the neutral, and we'll get on to the third question. This should be a straightforward one. There are no moral justifications for genocide under any circumstances. There are no moral justifications for genocide under any circumstances.
I feel that being in the middle.
No. Share your thoughts, opinions.
To be very transparent, I don't know much about genocide. I think the most prevalent one is like the Holocaust, but I think past that, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge, and so I feel like I can't speak on one or the other because I don't understand all the components that go into it. Obviously, it's a very horrible thing, but I'm really not sure which way to go on that one because I don't understand. Again, we talked about the history. I don't know all of the historical background, and I don't know all of the drivers for it, and I would like to be on that side, but I don't know.
I cannot think of any justification for the active and intentional destruction of a population, regardless of what the population is or anything like that. I feel like there are plenty of ways that the world has of being able to deal with large swaths of individuals at once, whether that be natural disaster, disease, famine, things of that nature that will take out population so we don't have to do any kind of population regulation, and it brings into the question of me of like who is in the moral high ground to be able to make the decision on who lives, who dies, who has lived enough of a life to be able to substantiate their decision. And I don't think that there's any one individual who has that much knowledge or power or understanding of how things work to be able to substantially make a decision on something like that. Thus, I don't think there's really any reason for it to be taking place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it depends on my definition of genocide. Like I don't like generalizations too much, and I think you have to generalize people to justify genocide. I think you have to stop caring about what they actually believe or think or sympathize with them as human beings. You have to demonize them, as we said earlier, and so I don't see a justification for that kind of broad categorization of people. Basically, I think you have to demonize them, basically, and I don't think that's justified. I think you have to actually try to understand people.
Well, thank you for your insight. I mean, this next question, I think we'll have a good time discussing, but everyone go into the next question, which is mutual. And this question is, the United States has played a large role in many of the instances of genocide throughout history. The United States has played a large role in many of the instances of genocide throughout history. Start with Kaya.
Go ahead.
Whether it's been complicit, like them being complicit, or it's been active engagement, the U.S. has been involved in pretty much most of the shady stuff that's taken place worldwide, whether it be through the FBI or the CIA. The U.S. government is very, very intentional with their funding and things of that nature. So like, rather than get into historical events sticking on something right now, the U.S. is not actively involved in the Middle East. However, they're sending tons of aid and tons of weapons and things of that nature. So by virtue of putting your money where your mouth is, the U.S. has done exponentially more harm than anybody could even understand. And we're only starting to get the top of the iceberg because they're releasing paperwork 20, 30 years after it's already taken place. They're releasing information later because they know if people knew what they were really doing, they would have a lot bigger conversations and more protests would be taking place. So yeah, I think that they're absolutely complicit in a lot of it, if not actively involved.
Yeah, the U.S. Definitely has their hands in a lot of different pots, and as we think about where our money's going and what treaties we have, I think especially with the treaties and the alliances, trying to back the people we support, it's going to come in many different forms. And once we agree to support somebody, we're kind of have to keep going with that. So I think maybe not explicitly, but there's definitely, some role being played there. I'm curious if that's something we would be able to avoid with the way we handle our international relations, but I wouldn't be surprised if we've played a role in genocide.
Yeah, it might have been the way the question was worded, but I think I agree with them if you're talking about recent history. I think if you're talking about all genocides throughout history, I think you go back pretty far. I think there's been a lot of genocides, like you guys were saying. There's some we don't talk about much. I think there's some we do, and I think I'd have to really look back and count them all up and kind of do research to say the U.S. has been involved in most of them, or had a large part in most of them. I think, I think of Europe, like you said. I think of a lot of other players in history. If I go back far enough, I think of Crusades. Anyway, I think there's a lot of genocides going back.
Fun fact for you: the most widely spread holiday across the planet is the being free from the British. Yeah.
To add on to what you guys are saying, it seems to me, so actually I would ask this in the next question. If we won't go back in neutral, this kind of just adds on to what you guys have been talking about history-wise. And that is education systems around the world. Sorry, wrong question. Genocide awareness should be taught in school. Yeah. So Emily, it is more, I'd say, I think all the time, like whether that's either the Holocaust or what's currently happening, do you think it should be?
Educating about genocide is not going to hurt, right? We're going to learn the background of as many historical events as possible to be most informed, to better understand the history of the country that we live in. I don't see a positive to not educating. So I think it's very important to add to it, and I guess put that out there, considering, again, the biggest genocide I can think of when learning in school is the Holocaust, and then I know like this much about the Rwandan genocide, but past that it's not a lot. So it really should be, added more.
I think that we should be taught more about European history in general, broad strokes, to include the genocides and all. I think that it's integral to be able to understand how things function, and a large part of how things have taken place is based off the winner's narrative, and a lot of it's Eurocentric. So the more that you can understand that side of things and be intentional about it, the better. Because even with the American history that they're focusing on in the school curriculum, a lot of times it's not even the entirety of the story. I remember when I was in high school, they were trying to say that the slaves were paid in Texas, like in the textbooks. So just the misinformation and things of that nature can be quite difficult to be able to discern through. And although I think it's integral to be able to have people informed on topics such as genocide, I think that it's difficult to say whether or not it should be taught, or what level it should be taught at in school, rather. Because people need to be exposed to it, but the time frame that you introduce information to people is important. Because if you're a kid and you're learning about that, it can be very formative, but it can be a very heavy topic. As where if you're a middle schooler, at least I know for me, I wasn't really paying attention to my classes like that. Like I got through the subject matter and some of it stuck with me, but for the majority of it, it was just kind of glossed over. I feel like something as heavy as genocide should be taken on in either college or high school, but then we even talk about the access to information and education. It's going to be difficult for everybody to get the same access. So yes, it should, in the short answer for the question, but I think there's a lot of different factors that go into it to make sure that it actually gets played out in the way that we would hope it would.
I think for me, it just goes back to what I was saying about, like, I believe it's helpful for preventing genocide, one, education. And I do believe some of you guys, like, we haven't been taught about a lot of them, right? So there's, like, even within one religious group, you pick Islam, pick Judaism, pick Christianity, you can find genocides within one group of people based on something else, based on ethnicity, right? So there's a lot to learn.
That was it for all my questions. We will not be done talking about this. We're going to get back into this. But first, I want to introduce our halftime show that was created by a wonderful creative director, Brandon. It's comprised of different interviews we took between Berkeley College and Jack London Square, where we asked people randomly what they thought about genocide, or what questions they think should be more answered more. And I hope you guys enjoy.
Recent instances of genocide that you believe isn't being talked about?
Yeah, Gaza. That'd be the first thing that comes to mind.
See, I'm the wrong person to ask for all this. I stay in my own lane and just try to focus on myself and what I can control. So I don't even pay too much attention. I try to keep stuff positive.
There's potential genocide going on in Sudan at the moment. There's a conflict between the north and the south of the country, and I think they're religiously divided.
I think there's a genocide going on in China against the Uyghur Muslims. I think we need to be very open about that. I think there was a genocide that Pakistan did against the people of Bangladesh. I'm from Pakistan and I'm very open about that. I think there's a genocide in South Africa. And I think we need to be very fair when we use the definition of genocide, and we need to hold all countries accountable.
I believe maybe you're kind of referring to the Palestine situation. It's kind of ironic, that the Jewish people, have faced this situation themselves in World War II, having been, victims. Now that they are overreacting, sort of knee-jerk overreacting, and not recognizing that they're doing the same to some other people. I don't think they recognize them as people. So there's not any rights, there's no wrongs, but there are a lot of people that are hurting in Palestine.
Well, I think people are aware of the conflict in Israel and Palestine, but commonly in media, it's not referred to as a genocide. Most people don't see what Israel is doing as trying to destroy Palestine and Palestinians.
Recent instances of genocide that you believe isn't being talked about?
Yeah, Gaza. That'd be the first thing that comes to mind.
See, I'm the wrong person to ask for all this. I stay in my own lane and just try to focus on myself and what I can control. So I don't even pay too much attention. I try to keep stuff positive.
There's a potential genocide going on in Sudan at the moment. There's a conflict between the north and the south of the country, and I think they're religiously divided.
I think there's a genocide going on in China against the Uyghur Muslims. I think we need to be very open about that. I think there was a genocide that Pakistan did against the people of Bangladesh. I'm from Pakistan and I'm very open about that. I think there's a genocide in South Africa. And I think we need to be very fair when we use the definition of genocide, and we need to hold all countries accountable.
I believe maybe you're kind of referring to the Palestine situation. It's kind of ironic, that the Jewish people, have faced this situation themselves in World War II, having been, victims. Now that they are overreacting, sort of knee-jerk overreacting, and not recognizing that they're doing the same to some other people. I don't think they recognize them as people. So there's not any rights, there's no wrongs, but there are a lot of people that are hurting in Palestine.
Well, I think people are aware of the conflict in Israel and Palestine, but commonly in media, it's not referred to as a genocide. Most people don't see what Israel is doing as trying to destroy Palestine and Palestinians.
Back from the halftime show. I hope you guys enjoyed the insightful knowledge on people's opinions. I mean, to get back on to what we were talking about earlier, I mean, before even that, I kind of want to ask you guys, did anyone's opinions change when hearing others talk? And even you guys are all like new, none of you guys have met each other, but based off of just hearing that short time for like 30 minutes, did you gather anything new, whether that was insight on what's currently happening around the world, or whether that's history-based, or... We can start with... I know you're thinking over there.
No, you can see it on my face. I don't know if I changed my opinions on things, but I definitely think there were certain thought processes and ways of looking at things that I hadn't necessarily approached myself. So it's always nice to hear a new set of opinions, even if it is similar to what I agree with, or different from what I'm normal to, or what is normal for me. It's always interesting to have informed conversations with people, regardless of whether or not we know each other like that. I think it's important to be able to have open and intentional dialogue. So learn something, not particularly, but was I enjoying the conversation? Absolutely. Not very many spaces or people I get a chance to talk to about genocide with on a daily basis. You know, it's a heavy topic. So I'm happy to be here and happy to have a conversation, but nothing new, nothing new.
Yeah, I think it was a nice reminder of the nuances of every single part of not just genocide situations, but also of history, and how a nice reminder of knowing the individual and knowing what we're up against is going to be primary for dissecting what's happening and hopefully preventing it. So it was really great getting insight from both of you and kind of thinking on topics I maybe didn't prioritize or think as in depth about. So always good to get an outside source and opinion on that.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I mean, I think I stepped out on the education one, and I think Emily brought up, you know, education isn't always effective, or it can be, the quality of education has a big impact, right? So I wasn't really thinking about that. I just assumed, you know, honest, good, thorough education, but education varies, right? So just nuance, like you're saying, it helped me think through that.
I mean, to add on to that education part, there's so many of us, including me particularly, that like, I don't know much. And something we did through our recent research with doing this our live stream is that genocide is a sensitive topic for many people to talk about, right? So a lot of, when we ask people to get, you know, interviews or discussions, a lot of them said, oh, we'll do it only if you just show the bottom half of my portion of body. And I want to ask you guys, what are ways we can kind of change that? Like, what are ways we can like have people, whether it's lack of education or lack of belief or anything else, what is it we can do to get everyone to like talk about it without them feeling comfortable or uncomfortable?
You gotta grow up. Learn how to have some normal conversations. There's no reason to have tons of emotion always invested in every conversation you have. It's important to be able to have intellectual conversations about all topics. If you can't have a conversation about an adult topic, it probably means, you know, some maturity issues. Now, if you have specific viewpoints that you don't feel comfortable with saying with your chest or having your face shown for it, it's probably for a good reason. And, you know, I think that it's so funny coming from the youngest person in the group, but the digital era has ruined us. Like, people feel so comfortable saying so much foul stuff because their face isn't shown or because they get to hide behind a keyboard. And when it comes to the interviews about sensitive topics, you should be able to stand on business. If you got an opinion, say it. It's part of who you are. It's part of your thought process. It doesn't mean that you're a monolith. Everybody has the opportunity to change and grow. It's part of the reason why you asked us the question at the beginning, like, what do we learn? But why or how we could evolve it, stop being so sensitive. Get the capacity to have adult conversations about adult topics. Not everything for everybody, but you should be able to sit down and be able to engage people. It's part of being an adult.
I think primary is admitting that you don't know. Kind of coming into this, I was really nervous to participate because I don't have a very large understanding of global topics. So I think admitting that you don't know is a big piece, and understanding that not everybody can know every piece about every single thing. So when we come into these big conversations, I worry that people are not bringing empathy to the table and understanding of who they're talking to. I mean, when people are impassioned and they have a high understanding, that's fantastic, but then barreling down on someone who doesn't know or is still working through their opinion is exceptionally detrimental to having these conversations. And so I was a person who struggles having these conversations because I don't really know the approach. I think that's a big challenge. So I think owning up to what you do when you don't know and bringing empathy to the table are a big part of that conversation.
For sure. And I'll just piggyback off of that because I think it's the main thing. I think the pressure you feel there is tied to people's livelihoods here. I mean, I went to law school. I have law school friends who, as soon as October 7th happened, from on high, from the top of their firms, they found letters pressuring them to believe one way or the other, right? Before you could even get the information, before you can start to think about what's happened, before you can try and find the right media sources, you're feeling pressure to go one way or the other, right? You're feeling pressure if I could lose my job if I say something out loud or that. And so it's social pressure, and it's a lack of empathy. It's also just, you know, you're kind of fighting for your livelihood in some ways. And so people become very sensitive in that. So I think your question, I mean, what do we do? I think education is helpful, but I don't know. There might need to be some policies around work and
I even think it's more of experience too, and I even like education is probably more. I mean, you guys need to let me know, but like I think the more you grow up and the more you go on your own, separated from either school, family, you learn things like from the real world, whether that's friends or just meeting new people, right? I mean, you gain a lot of insight. So
I'm also curious to the people who are being interviewed and the people who are requesting not having their face. Depending on where you live and who you are, there could be very physical consequences to that. And so, yes, owning up to the conversation, but also, and like for me, for example, whatever I say here, more than likely is not going to have major consequences. But there are people, especially in different cultural circles, now they think about like each instance of genocide. Like if you say something that doesn't match your group or match what the pressure is there a bigger consequence, especially depending on where you live? So I'm curious about that too.
Yeah, I think opening up conversations with intentionality of education rather than persecution and antagonization is important, and I feel like that is something that I skipped over entirely. That you can only have an adult conversation where you get to learn about things if you're open to hearing both sides of the conversation. If you're coming at somebody with the anticipation that they're going to have a specific response and you're solely waiting for your chance to speak, that's not a conversation. It's a trial. So if you're putting people in positions where it's genuinely a conversation, which, I mean, go off. I know you, Gabe, right? So to know the people who are going to have the conversations and to be able to go out into public, like, I don't think as a group of students you were asking any questions or putting anybody in a position where they felt like they could be in danger, where they were intellectually at a disadvantage or anything like that. So I guess that's part of the reason why I was so forward with my answer in that regard. But yeah, no, you gotta be open to the education aspect. If it's not open dialogue entirely, where people get the opportunity to have those moments where they can say, I don't know, or even have the opposite opinion and then have a conversation about it, because you don't got to agree with everybody about everything, but you got to be able to have those conversations to be able to see where people lie.
Yeah. There's a question I wanted to ask, and the question was, what do you think causes people to resort to genocide? Why is the belief of getting rid of a group of people or silencing a group of people, why do you think that's a way of like solving either like a war, a problem, or I just want to ask you that.
That's hard. Yeah.
We're just humans and we just resort to violence, and then I don't know.
I think that the majority of people, from my understanding, who have done these large-scale atrocities have, for lack of a better way of saying it, been narcissists and sociopaths. You have to have a certain level of self-importance to believe that you're the one to make the decision where people die. And you also have to be, willing to other and separate yourself from somebody and not see them as a person. And if you're able to not have emotion in the circumstance and to be able to push it that far, I can only make the assumption that there is some kind of mental health crisis going on. Because as somebody who does not struggle with those things, that has never crossed my mind. At no point have I thought, you know what? That's what we're going to do today. We're going to start an uprising. That group, they're done. That's just never even been in my realm of possibility. So it's a very interesting and thought-provoking question, but I don't know if I have a legitimate answer. That's the best I got for you.
The first thing that comes to mind is power. When I think about, and I don't know if this is the case, but when I think about leaders of situations of genocide that have happened as very charismatic people, right? Like one person can only do so much on their own, but their charisma, their draw trickles down. And so I think wanting the power, and I think too, nationalism plays such a huge key role in that. I think about like Germany, for an example. There were many people who did want to wipe out the Jewish population, but there was a lot of people who fought because they loved their country, or they were possibly a little delusional about their country. But it all trickled down to what can we do to support like our country. And so why wipe out a group of people? So that there's no one standing in your way for getting more powerful. But then the question goes, what do you do with that power? So it definitely is a delusion, but that's the primary source I can think of is power.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned nationalism because it's a lot easier to have an out-group and an in-group when you already have a defined in-group being the people that you surround yourself with most closely.
Or even if I think about pride in your country too. You know, if you, maybe in and out group, but if you believe that your country is the best and you like how things are, it's really easy to just continue keeping along with what's rolling. And I imagine people who have joined the service for their country have one of the biggest challenges, because where do you draw the line in I'm serving my country and I'm doing my duty, but also what we're doing is not okay.
The amount of things people will do if they have an order.
I think it's, again, I haven't studied them all, but I think power is a big thing. I think there's a pattern. I think there's power, a power imbalance. I think there's ignorance of other people. Know this other group that well. And if you do, it's like negative from the past or some trauma from the past, right? And then there's just a fear probably at times of just losing a lot of power, right? Like a lot of cases, it's like some colonial power is backing some other group of people, and then you're this other group of people, and it's like if they come over and like take over us or completely, they have the power to eliminate us, right? So there's a fear component, there's a huge political shift probably coming, right? And then you get tempted into, because you don't know this other group, some charismatic person can come along and just be like, this is what's going to happen if we don't move now, right? And so I think, I don't think this is the same in every case, but I think there are some ingredients, and I would say I take an opposite view. I think and this is, I was an optimist before, I was a pessimist, right? I think we all have the potential for it. I don't think you have to be a crazy person. I think we have the potential if you're ignorant enough, and it's just kind of a belief about human nature thing, but if you're ignorant enough, the ingredients are there, I think we're all at risk of it, and so that's why I believe in the education thing and
like that power, I mean, being power hungry, but also like, it's almost like, if you think about it, in the Holocaust, they used propaganda, right? They would, I think they said power, and they make you feel scared of the other, like, enemy, or whatever such it is, they'll make you think, if we don't do this, they're going to do this to us, and this, and that's what they manipulated, I think, the youth to think. And I think that's even what's happening now. For anything, they'll try to change what you naturally feel into something like, hey, this is what they're going to do, right? Even though it's not true. So, I mean,
Old people don't fight wars, young people do. So if you're going to have a group of people that you want to have on your side, it's going to be the young and malleable, because they're going to be the people fighting for you.
Oh yeah, thinking about
indoctrination.
With the.
I mean, the Nazi youth camps and shit like that, and then, sorry, I apologize about the cursing. Or like even what you're talking about now, like there's so much misinformation being spread around, and very, very different topic, but like the manosphere and like all of the rhetoric around misogyny and things like that, it's super easy to be able to get an entire generation of kids on your side if you're willing to preach the same stuff over and over again, and it sounds good to their ears. So yeah, the nationalization and indoctrination of children is scary.
That's why I worry too about you were talking about earlier, doing self-research.
Yeah.
But it's really hard knowing what to look for and where to look, and knowing what to, what to focus on. And so, we have access to so much information at our fingertips, but where is it coming from and what do I do with it is a really big part of that.
That's true. People generally look for sources that tend to preach their same belief systems, and an echo chamber isn't helpful for anybody.
I want to ask this question that it's more involved with like other nations and countries. What are long-term impacts of genocide on affected communities and nations? Like we see it on TV and we see it on social media, but we don't actually like live it. We don't actually like feel what they, what other people go through. And specifically, I'm thinking of, what's currently happening with Palestine. But like, besides that, how do you think these people are like impacted, like long term? What do you think happens to their families and so forth through evolution throughout time?
Hurt people, and It's so interesting because the largest genocide that most people are privy to is the Holocaust, and it happened so many years ago that a lot of the people in our age range, everybody here, were not directly impacted by it in ways that we understand, right? But generational trauma is a real thing, and being able to pass down, whether it be specific behaviors that were induced due to traumatic experiences, or whether it be specific rhetoric that was taken on because of experiences, it's hard to be able to state where it starts and where it ends because it's so far-reaching. And I don't think that we're going to be able to truly understand the implications of what took place here until another 10 or 15 years. But from what I'm seeing off bat, I think that people who have lost family members and who have been exposed to extreme violence are probably not going to be terribly happy, and there's probably going to be grudges held. And the grudges are going to be held depending on how much information is given and on who they take on as the individual who is, or the people or the group who is imposing the injustice on them. So whether it be malice held against the U.S. or malice held against Israel or whomever, there's going to be repercussions to paid socially for generations to come. It's very hard to say what that looks like now, because previously we didn't have the same kind of media, the same kind of access to information, all that kind of stuff. So it's a brand new era for us to be able to see how this kind of stuff disseminates out. Hard to say.
I mean, does it not depend on the outcome too? Because if a whole people group are destroyed, you're suddenly losing a culture. Fear has won in that situation. If a culture is wiped out or a very large chunk is wiped out, the fear for that community and the loss of that culture coupled together is going to reverberate. You're no longer going to have, that rich history, or the way that you look upon your culture, moving forward is going to forever be changed. And so I think about that from kind of more of a personal level, but I think just a massive sense of loss all the way across the board. But exactly like you said, we don't know the implications, especially, if we haven't been exposed to it personally, or even if we have, seen that global impact is very difficult, if not impossible.
I mean, we're still seeing the play out of World War II, like I was just talking about. Like, the people who are persecuting the largest, quote-unquote, genocide of the planet currently were the people who are most heavily prosecuted previously. If there is not a better example of hurt people, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll add, I think, and I don't know how likely it is, but probably some bad actors can come along and learn from this in a bad way, right? This is how you manipulate people. This is how you repeat this if you want to gain power another way. So that's kind of a dark thought, but I also think that's possible.
Another question that I think is important is why. So we talked about how people in power, like they feel like a need to resort to genocide. Not need, but like. One person that I think about is Hitler, right? Because he had so much power, and I think people resort to genocide because they also feel that they have something to lose, and like you said, duty to serving a nation. How can we if you guys had the power to, I don't know, this is a heavy one. If you guys had the power to stop genocide or change anything throughout history, or change what we as people have done, what would that what would that be? What would that look like?
I don't think it's possible to answer. I'm sorry, I'm cutting in line over here. I don't think it's possible to answer that question. I mean, obviously, we want to live in a perfect world. We want to live in a place where genocide doesn't exist. But as we talked about, how could one person think that they hold so much power that they could do this? But how are we to understand, or not understand, to know the impacts of whatever we change? I don't think there is an answer to that question.
Yeah, in my 24 years of life, I have not come across anything that is broad strokes going to be able to fix any of these problems. However, if I could do anything, and I mean literally anything, I would introduce every one of the people who has committed a genocide to themselves. you would have to have a conversation. Get to know that person. Do you like them? Because if you don't like what you're seeing, there's obviously larger conversations that need to be taking place. And the only person who's able to get across to somebody who's fanatical is somebody who is equally fanatical. And I mean, like Adolf Hitler as the example, because we keep going back to it, that man was off all of the drugs. He was hyped up 24/7. They created speed as a means to be able to keep their people walking for days on end. Like, that's not a rational person. There's not like a thing that I've experienced in life where I'm like, you know, that conversation I had with my uncle would really do him some good. You know, like there is no answer. But I feel like self-reflection, the things that can help with facilitated attention shifts so that you can have greater capacity to be able to understand your own experience could do them great good. For my most crude answer, make them take an eighth of mushrooms and see how that turns out. If they still want to can do it at the end of it, then go for it, dog. But I don't think anybody in their right mind would have those kinds of transformative experiences or introspective experiences and then come out the same person on the end wanting to do that. So yeah. No answer, but yeah.
No answer and mushrooms.
Yeah,
Got it, okay.
Yeah, I kind of have no answer, but the only thing I can think of is if you could, like, introduce media more into history, because you're able to reverse the demonization a little bit if you can tell stories about people, right? And so if you were able to shine the light on whoever's losing the power more, even in this current conflict, I've had to search for certain perspectives a lot more, right? I've had to search for, I know who the head of IDF is. I don't know who, like Hamas, I just heard Hamas for a long time. Who are the people behind it, right? Who are the individuals? And so media, if like pure media could have power to actually give transparency and like tell stories about people a little bit more, maybe I don't know how you do that. I'm just saying, you know, it's just.
I mean, we're coming close to time, but one last question I'd like to say is that we also talked about how media, media to me is kind of like a double-edged sword. It plays like bad into what we're talking about, right? Genocide, because then you can manipulate certain things to your nature, or you can also inform people on current topics on what's happening, right? So I'm thinking in my head, like, what would have happened if we would have introduced media back then, or maybe back in the past? Do you think the same outcome would have happened, or do you think we would have changed on whatever would have happened?
We'd have way better meetings.
I'm kidding.
I mean, you're not wrong.
No. I think dissemination of information is dissemination of information. Humans are going to communicate in the ways that they have capacity to, and I don't necessarily think that having more access to communication or information is going to change people's actions. I think, like, historically speaking, retrospectively speaking, because the world was what it was at that time frame. Can't stir the creamer out of the coffee. You know, like Duke Ferdinand's still going to get shot. There's still certain things that are going to happen and play out that are going to cause domino effects. Now, could there be different rhetoric or different history that is shared because of that? Absolutely. Anne Frank has a video phone in her house. There's a completely different side to this that we don't even know. There's, you know, different perspectives, but it's the human nature thing makes it difficult for me. I don't have the greatest hope or idea for what humans on the average are or who they can be, but there's great hope having conversations with people like yourself, Gabe, where the young people are interested in learning and actually having introspective conversations and doing all that. So less about the media and more about the engagement of the youth.
I don't think this answers your question, but one of the most impactful museum exhibits I've been to is at the World War I Museum in Kansas City, and there's the booth you sit in where you listen to songs and poems and monologues that were written during World War I, and I think there are also ones where you can hear different narratives, and so I think my hope is that if media were present at that time, it would bring that humanization more into it. I follow a crafting page on Facebook, and this woman in, why am I blanking, in Ukraine, she's posting her quilting patterns that she's making during the war and telling stories of what's going on with her family. And, you know, we talk about narratives and stories, and personal human experience can kind of shift that mindset. So I would hope that media, even if it's down to a dope song that was made during the conflict, like, that's still incredibly impactful. So I think on a small scale, it would be so valuable if that were there. But media does take all forms and can be manipulated in many different ways. But I'd like to think that we could see some small beauties out of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the negative stuff is always going to be there. You just kind of, the dominoes are going to fall a different way now. You're going to have to fight that, right? You got good journalists reporting and shining light on something. Now the powers that be that are trying to manipulate are trying to snuff them out, right? And now it's like, so it's going to be, but to Emily's point, like, they will still make an impact, right, that we currently wouldn't have seen in the past. So I can't say for sure, but I think it would have a positive impact, but we still have to deal with this problem of, you know, trying to get rid of certain people and snuff out certain narratives. Yeah.
Something just hit me, like, wow, because you brought up Ukraine, and I blanked out. I completely forgot that Ukraine and Russia were still having a war. That's what my point is. Like, with media, like, we focus so much on maybe something that's current, what's headline news, and then we kind of just forget about what other stuff that's currently happening around the world. And I think that's more. You guys can maybe help me out, but I think that's more of a U.S. kind of problem with our news and with our news stations, and it's, I don't know. What do you guys think?
State-sponsored news outlets of any kind are interesting, to say the least. Trying to find non-biased thoughts and opinions on heavily emotional topics is almost impossible. So I think rather than trying to find non-biased information and or like trying to avoid certain news outlets, getting all of the information and then being a critical thinker to discern what sounds accurate to you or what is being talked about the most is important in that regard. Because it's interesting that you forgot about it. Because for me, I've been on, like, not on my mind, but that's on my mind. Like, it's not something that's disappeared for me. It's just, you know, it's not in the everyday conversation. It's not publicized in the same kind of way. But it's still very much going on and crazy. It's just, it's not a genocide. So that's not been on the conversation topic for the day. But yeah, no, news in general is interesting.
Or news anywhere. With the U.S., I guess it's a little bit unique in that we get so many perspectives, because we know in countries, especially countries that restrict, are very restrictive on their media, they're not getting the full picture. But it still feels so difficult to find out what's going on, because you have the huge media blast and you have, you know, this many sources reporting for this long, and then suddenly it's the next topic. And there's so much going on. It's so difficult to know what to care about, what to research, what to be a part of. And so that's one of the challenges of coming into this conversation of what knowledge base do you come in and what do you do with that. And I don't think it's just a U.S. thing, but everywhere has it a little bit different too.
I agree. I don't think it's a U.S. thing. I think it's just, I think we have, you know, more media channels, and so we deal with it more, but there's always agendas, to your point. You know, there's always agendas.
I mean, we're cutting the time short, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. But thank you to all the guys so much for, you guys kind of taught me. I for sure gained some new information. I hope the people watching gain some new information on what's currently happening. And I also want to take the time. Thank you for coming out here. I know some of you guys had to come off work. We had one person come on who didn't show up, or, you know, whatever it is. But again, thank you for coming on, and thank you for coming on to the Human Dialogue.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Great conversation.
Any shout-outs to any business, website, company?
Sure.
Shout out to My Group Design. Shout out to
Shout out to Elevated Legacy.
Elevated Legacy. Yeah. Shout out to Latitude. Shout out. I don't know.
Shout out to your team. You're all doing a great
Yeah,
job.
no, for real.
Do we all want to come in?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give a little round of applause to y'all, because y'all really did a great job.
so on.
So you guys go ahead and take your turn introducing yourselves on the mic.
My name is Brandon. I'm the creative director for the group. I did a lot of the editing and like interviewing people.
Hi, my name's Daniela, and I was the sound technician, the video technician.
Hi, I'm Abdiel. I was doing promotion and marketing, and for the live stream, I was helping out with being a moderator.
Hello, my name is Danny Godinez. I was the sound engineer. Everything you were hearing was on me, and I was helping out with graphics and stuff, so yeah.